Who let you in here? The Mafia boss's icy voice echoed through the grand hall of the Moretti estate, where his lavish engagement celebration was unfolding before hundreds of distinguished guests. Every head turned toward a 3-year-old girl standing silently before him, in a faded, worn-out dress. The room grew unbearably tense as everyone assumed the child and her housekeeper mother would be thrown out in disgrace. But before anyone could intervene, the Mafia boss's fiancée stepped forward, gently took the little girl's hand, and asked him to let her stay for the celebration. Her unexpected kindness left the entire hall speechless. No one could have imagined that this seemingly small moment would ignite a chain of tragedy, expose secrets buried for years, and change all their lives forever. Stay until the very end, because what happened next was something no one could have predicted. Alessandro's nod was almost invisible. Only Isabella caught it. She squeezed Emma's small hand once, then led the child through the crowd of guests toward the side door that opened into the servants' kitchen. Sophia was pouring wine when they arrived. She looked up, saw Isabella, saw Emma, and the color drained from her face. Isabella smiled gently and bent slightly at the waist. "She stays with you here," Isabella said. "But she stays." Sophia bowed her head. "Thank you, Miss Romano." "Thank you." Isabella touched Emma's hair once, then turned back toward the sound of music and glass and laughter. The great hall swallowed her again. Sophia knelt in front of her daughter. "You do not move from this corner. Do you understand?" Emma nodded. "Say it. I do not move." Sophia kissed the top of her head and returned to the row of crystal glasses lined along the counter. A string quartet played somewhere beyond the wall. Servers moved in and out with silver trays. The scent of rosemary and warm bread mixed with the sharp bite of red wine and expensive perfume. Emma watched her mother's hands for a long time. The small hands moved so fast, so carefully, like a bird arranging its own feathers. When Sophia lifted a full glass and set it on a tray beside the others, Emma stepped forward. "Mama, I can help." "No, little one. Please. It is very heavy for you." Sophia hesitated. There was one tray left, a single glass on it. The house steward had asked twice already for it to be brought to Mr. Moretti personally. Sophia looked toward the door, then at her daughter's serious 3-year-old face. "Only this one," she said. "You walk very slow. You do not run. You take it to Mr. Moretti and then you come straight back to me." Emma lifted the tray with both small hands. The glass wobbled once and then settled. She walked into the great hall through the side door, past the tall backs of men in dark suits and the shimmering shoulders of women in silk. No one looked down. No one noticed a small girl in a worn dress carrying a single glass of red wine across a marble floor. Alessandro stood near the tall windows, speaking to an older man with silver hair and heavy rings. His head was turned. His hand was not yet raised for the glass. Emma stopped beside him and waited. Isabella turned from a conversation 2 steps away and saw the child. She saw the tray. She saw that Alessandro had not noticed. She smiled and moved forward. "Let me hold that for him," Isabella said, lifting the glass from the tray with practiced ease. She turned to face the room, raising the wine in the air. "To the man who taught me that love finds you when you are not looking." Guests lifted their own glasses. A soft cheer rose. Isabella drank. 1 breath, 2, 3. Her smile faltered. The color left her cheeks in a single sweep, as though something inside her had emptied all at once. She swayed. The glass slipped from her fingers and shattered against the marble in a sound like a small bell breaking. Alessandro turned. He was already moving before he understood what he was moving toward. He caught her under the arms just as her knees folded. The great hall did not fall silent all at once. It emptied of sound in stages, guest by guest, breath by breath, until nothing remained but the ragged pull of Isabella's breathing against Alessandro's chest, and the sudden, terrible quiet of a room full of people who understood, without being told, that something had just gone very wrong. The black sedan tore through the wet streets of New York without sirens. Sirens would have drawn cameras, and cameras would have drawn questions. The driver knew every route between the estate and the private clinic in the Upper East Side, and he took the shortest one, the one that ran along the river where the traffic lights were fewest. Isabella lay across the folded rear seat on a stretcher, improvised from a wool blanket and 2 of Bruno's men. Her lips had gone the color of bruised plums. Her breathing was shallow, each pull of air arriving late, as though something inside her chest had to remember how to work before it could begin again. Alessandro rode in the front passenger seat because there was no room in the back. He did not turn his head once during the drive. He watched the road as if his watching could shorten it. Dr. Enrico Falcone was waiting at the side entrance of the private clinic under a green canopy that dripped rainwater onto the concrete. He was in his late 60s, a compact man with silver hair combed straight back, and he had been the personal physician to the Moretti family for more than 20 years. He asked no questions. He gestured, and the men carried Isabella through the door and into a private examination room, where 2 nurses waited with a crash cart already prepared. Enrico worked fast. He drew blood from the crook of Isabella's arm and passed the vial to the nurse without looking. He pressed a small light against each of her pupils in turn. He lifted her upper lip and studied the color of her gums. He listened to her heart with the concentration of a man listening for a distant sound in a storm. "Stomach contents," he said quietly. The nurse threaded a soft tube through Isabella's nose and drew back a small amount of dark fluid into a syringe. Enrico held it up to the light and his mouth tightened. He turned to the second nurse. "Plant-based. Fast-acting. I want dialysis within the hour. Prepare the machine now." The nurse moved. Enrico stepped out into the hallway. Alessandro stood there with one hand against the wall and the sleeve of his jacket still darkened where the wine had soaked through. He had not noticed the stain. He had not noticed anything since the moment Isabella's knees folded against him. "She was poisoned, Alessandro," Enrico said. "Something botanical. It moved through her very quickly. We are filtering her blood now. If she had swallowed the whole glass, we would already be having a different conversation." She stopped at one mouthful. "That may be what saves her." Alessandro did not answer. Bruno Salvato appeared at the end of the corridor. He was a wide-shouldered man in his 50s with a shaved head and eyes that had seen every kind of trouble a man could see and still walk afterward. He crossed the distance in 6 long strides and stopped a respectful arm's length from Alessandro. "The guests are gone," Bruno said quietly. "Every one of them. Escorted out through the front gate. The estate is sealed. Nobody in, nobody out, without my word." Alessandro turned his head at last. His eyes did not look wet. They did not look angry. They looked like the surface of very deep water. "Find out," he said, "who touched that glass." His voice was low and flat. There was no threat inside it, because there did not need to be. Bruno bowed his head once and turned back the way he had come. Behind Alessandro, the double doors of the emergency room swung shut. Through the small window in the door, he could see the dialysis machine being wheeled into position beside Isabella's bed. A nurse was already threading a line into the vein beneath her collarbone. The door clicked closed on its magnetic lock, and the small red light above the frame turned green. Isabella was inside. Alessandro was outside. And somewhere in his house, someone had put poison into a glass of wine that a 3-year-old girl in a worn dress had carried across a marble floor. The estate was different when Alessandro walked back through its doors. The music was gone. The guests were gone. The great hall that had held 500 people less than 3 hours before now held only the smell of extinguished candles and the faint sour trace of spilled wine on marble that no one had yet been permitted to clean. Someone had drawn the tall drapes closed. The chandeliers had been dimmed to a low amber. A single row of candles still burned along the mantel above the fireplace, and one by one they were guttering out, each small flame drowning in its own pooled wax. Bruno was waiting in the small monitoring room off the east corridor. 2 members of the security team stood at attention when Alessandro entered. Bruno gestured them out and closed the door. "I have the footage," Bruno said. He turned the largest of the 3 monitors so Alessandro could see. "I have watched it 4 times already. I want you to see it before I say what I think." He pressed a key. The screen showed the servants' kitchen from above. Sophia, in her plain black uniform, pouring wine into a row of glasses. Emma stepping forward, small hands lifted. Sophia hesitating. Sophia bending down to speak to her. Emma lifting the tray with both hands and walking out of frame through the side door. Bruno switched cameras. The great hall now. Emma crossing the marble floor between the tall backs of guests. No one bending toward her. No one reaching for the tray. She reached Alessandro. She stood beside him and waited. Isabella turned. Isabella lifted the glass. Bruno paused the image. "There is no other angle," Bruno said quietly. "I checked the ceiling cameras, the entrance cameras, the ones over the buffet. No one touches that glass between the moment your housekeeper pours it and the moment Miss Romano drinks." Alessandro looked at the frozen image for a long time. "And the kitchen?" he said finally. 2 men are searching now." The knock came less than 10 minutes later. One of Bruno's men, still in his dark suit, held out a small object wrapped in a linen napkin. Bruno took it and unfolded the cloth on the table. A glass vial, no larger than a lipstick tube. No label, a shallow pool of amber liquid still resting inside it. "Where was it?" Bruno asked. "The vanity drawer," the man said. "In the housekeeper's room, 2nd drawer down, under a stack of folded handkerchiefs." Bruno lifted his eyes to Alessandro. Alessandro said nothing. They brought Sophia across the great hall a few minutes later. She had not been told anything. Emma walked beside her, one small fist twisted into the hem of her mother's uniform. The child's eyes were very wide. She did not cry. She had not yet been given a reason she could understand. Sophia stopped 3 steps from Alessandro. Her hands had begun to tremble, but her back was straight. She looked at the vial on the table beside him. She looked at his face. She opened her mouth. Alessandro did not let her speak. He did not raise his voice. He did not look at her a second time. He turned his head slightly toward Bruno and said, "Take them to the west wing. Lock the door." Bruno did not hesitate. He gestured, and 2 men stepped forward and put their hands lightly on Sophia's shoulders and on Emma's small back. Sophia did not resist. She lifted Emma into her arms as they walked, because the child had gone quiet in the way children go quiet when they know something is wrong but do not have the words for it. The heavy oak door of the west wing closed behind them with a low sound that carried down the corridor. A bolt slid. For a moment, there was nothing. Then Emma began to cry. It was not a loud cry. It was the small, breathless sound of a child who has just understood that her mother cannot fix this one. "Mama," she said. "Mama, mama, mama." The word traveled the length of the empty corridor and reached Alessandro through the wall. He did not move. The room they brought Sophia to had no windows. It sat beneath the east wing of the estate, at the end of a corridor lined with wine racks that most guests were told led only to storage. The door was steel, painted to look like wood. The walls were bare stone. A single overhead lamp cast a hard circle of light onto a metal table bolted to the floor. Sophia sat on one side. Alessandro sat on the other. She was not restrained. There were no cuffs on her wrists, no chain around her ankle. Her hands rested flat on the table, palms down, fingers slightly spread, as though she had been told to keep them there and had decided to obey without being told twice. She had not asked where Emma was. She had understood, walking down the stone stairs, that the answer to that question would not be given, and that asking would only remind Alessandro that a child could be used as a lever. Alessandro did not speak first. He reached into his jacket pocket and drew out the glass vial. He set it on the table between them. The amber liquid inside caught the overhead light and threw a small, warm reflection onto the metal surface, like the last of a sunset that had no business being underground. Sophia looked at the vial. She looked at Alessandro. Her jaw tightened once, and she said the words as though she had been rehearsing them the entire walk down. "I did not do this." Alessandro did not respond. "I would never hurt Miss Isabella. I would never hurt anyone. Not with poison, not with a knife, not with my hands, not for money, not for anger, not for any reason a person could name." She swallowed, and her voice steadied further. "I don't know what that is. I don't know how it came to be in my room." Alessandro laid one finger on the vial and turned it a quarter rotation, as if to make sure she could see it from every side. "Then explain to me," he said, "how it was found in the second drawer of your vanity, beneath handkerchiefs that you fold yourself, in a room only you and your daughter enter." Sophia opened her mouth. Nothing came out. She looked at the vial as though she were trying to remember something she had never known. "I cannot explain it," she said finally. "I would lie to you now if I could think of a lie that would help. I cannot. I did not put it there. I do not know who did." Alessandro leaned back in his chair. "Miss Romano," he said. "Have you ever quarreled with her?" "No, sir." "Has she ever raised her voice at you? Corrected you? Made you feel your work was not enough?" "No, sir. Miss Romano has been kind to me from the first day, kinder than I deserved to be treated by a woman in her position. Tonight, in the hall, she asked you to let my daughter stay. I will remember that until the day I die." Her eyes filled, but the tears sat there and did not fall. Her voice did not shake. "I have no reason to want her hurt. I have every reason to want her well." Alessandro watched her for a long moment. Then he stood. He did not raise his voice. He did not slam his hand on the table. He simply pushed the chair back and turned toward the steel door. Sophia lifted her chin. "Mr. Moretti." He stopped, one hand on the door handle. He did not turn around. "Before you go," she said, "there is something I need you to know." Alessandro did not answer at first. He stood with his hand on the steel door and looked at the seam where the frame met the wall, as though the answer to whether to stay were written there. Then he let go of the handle and walked back to the table. He pulled out the chair and sat down. Sophia did not speak immediately. Her hands were still flat against the metal. She looked at them for a moment, then lifted her eyes and asked something that did not belong in a basement interrogation room. "Has Emma eaten dinner?" Alessandro did not answer. He did not move. He watched her the way a man watches a lock he has not yet found the right key for. Sophia understood the silence for what it was. She took a slow breath and began to speak. "I came to work in this house 1 year and 2 months ago," she said. "You did not hire me yourself. Your housekeeper, Mrs. Coletti, hired me. She was a friend of a woman who had employed me before, in a smaller house in New Jersey. She knew I had a daughter. She knew I had no husband. She did not ask more." She paused, moistened her lips, and continued. "Emma is not my child by blood. I have never lied about that to the people who mattered to me. I took her in when she was very small. Her mother was a woman I knew. That woman could not keep her. She asked me to raise the child as if she were mine, and I agreed. I never regretted the choice. Emma is my daughter in every way that a person can be a daughter to a person." Alessandro listened without expression. He waited until she stopped for breath, and then he cut across her. "That is not what you called me back for." Sophia looked at him. Her mouth opened once and then closed. The silence held for what felt like a long time. Somewhere a pipe ticked as it cooled. 7 seconds passed, though neither of them counted. Through the wall, muffled but distinct, came the sound of a child crying. Emma had been placed in the adjoining holding room. The stone walls were thick, but the corner where the 2 rooms met carried sound in the way old buildings sometimes do. Her voice reached them in fragments. "Mama, Mama." Then a small hiccup of breath. "The tall man. Mama, the tall man." The words meant nothing to Alessandro. They meant nothing to Sophia either. Neither of them knew, in that moment, who the child was speaking of, or why she had thought of him now. But Sophia heard her daughter crying through a wall she could not cross, and something in her broke that had held for the last 2 hours. She began to cry, not the composed tears she had held back upstairs. These came from a lower place. Her shoulders did not shake, but the tears fell steadily onto the backs of her hands and made small dark points on the metal table. She did not wipe them. She lifted her eyes to Alessandro's face and held them there. Whatever she had spent the last 3 years deciding whether to say, she was deciding now, and she was deciding all at once. Her mouth opened. "Emma is Olivia's child." Alessandro did not move for a long moment. His face did not change. Only his hands moved. He slowly laid them flat on the metal table, one on each side of the glass vial, and rested them there. His fingers did not tighten. His shoulders did not lift. He did not ask her to repeat what she had said. Sophia understood that his silence was the space in which she was permitted to speak. "Olivia was my older sister," she said. "There were only the 2 of us. Our mother raised us alone after our father left. Olivia was 6 years older than me. She was the person who taught me how to braid my own hair. She was the person who signed my school papers when our mother worked nights." Her voice was flat now, drained of the fear it had carried a minute before. She was not speaking to Alessandro. She was reciting something she had rehearsed so many times inside her own head that the words no longer needed her. 3 years ago, Olivia left you. She did not leave because she loved someone else. She did not leave because she betrayed you. She left because she had learned, 1 week before, that she was pregnant. She knew what your enemies did to the children of men in your position. She knew what had happened to the Moretti boy in Chicago. She knew what had happened to the Colangelo twins. She left because she believed the only way to keep the child alive was to keep the child unknown. She paused. Her tears had stopped. The muscle at her jaw worked once. She hid the pregnancy from everyone. From our mother. From me. She stayed with a woman in New Jersey who ran a small private clinic for people who needed to disappear for a while. She wrote me only after she was 7 months along. That was the first I knew of any of it. She looked at Alessandro. His hands had not moved. She gave birth to Emma at that clinic. There were complications after the delivery. A hemorrhage that could not be stopped. She lived for 6 hours after the birth. In those 6 hours, she made me promise 2 things. Sophia's voice did not tremble. The first was to raise Emma as my own daughter, to give her my name, to let her grow up believing I was her mother, so that no one would ever come looking for her. The second, she said, was not to bring her to you, not until she was old enough to choose for herself whether she wanted to know you. She swallowed once. "I have worked in this house for 1 year and 2 months. I applied for this position through Mrs. Coletti because I wanted to see you, not to speak to you, not to tell you, only to watch, to know whether the man Olivia had loved was the man she believed you to be. I told myself I would wait until Emma was 5. Then I would decide." She stopped. Alessandro did not move for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was very quiet. "Where is Olivia buried?" Sophia named a small cemetery on the north side of the river, in a town Alessandro had driven past many times without ever stopping. She said the plot number. She said the name on the stone, which was not Olivia's real surname, but the surname of the woman who had run the clinic and who had signed for the burial as next of kin. Alessandro repeated none of it. He wrote none of it down. He looked at her once more, briefly, as though searching for the shape of her sister in her face. Then he stood. He walked to the steel door. He did not look back at her. He opened the door, stepped through, and closed it behind him. Sophia sat alone in the room with the vial and the overhead lamp, and the sound of Emma still crying softly through the wall. She did not know whether he had believed her. She did not know whether it mattered anymore. Alessandro walked up the stone stairs from the basement without speaking to anyone. He passed 2 of Bruno's men without seeing them. He crossed the great hall, still darkened, still marked by the small crescent of dried wine on the marble, where no one had yet been given permission to clean, and he climbed the wide central staircase to his private study on the 2nd floor. He closed the door behind him. He locked it. He picked up the internal line. "Enrico, come to my study. Bring what you need to draw a sample from a child, and a sample from me. This does not go into any hospital. It does not go into any laboratory the family does not own. It does not touch a computer connected to the outside. Do it here, in this house, tonight." He put the receiver down before Enrico could ask a single question. Enrico arrived within 20 minutes, carrying a small black case. He did not ask why. He did not ask for whom. He simply set the case on the corner of Alessandro's desk and waited. "The child is asleep in the west wing," Alessandro said. "Do it there. Do not wake her. Do not let her mother see." Enrico nodded and left. The house was very quiet at that hour. Enrico walked the length of the corridor without meeting anyone, and Bruno's man at the door of the holding room stepped aside without a word. The mother had been moved briefly to the room beyond so that Enrico could work. Sophia had not resisted. She had understood, from the request itself, more than she had been told. Emma was curled on the small cot in the corner. She had cried herself to sleep. Her cheeks were still wet. One of her small hands was fisted around a fold of the blanket. Enrico opened the case, prepared a soft swab, and knelt beside her. He touched the swab to the inside of her cheek with the care of a grandfather. She did not stir. She did not open her eyes. He sealed the swab in its sleeve and left the room. He returned to Alessandro's study for the second sample. Alessandro opened his mouth. Enrico did what needed to be done. Then he left again with both samples in his case and closed the door softly behind him. Alessandro did not sit down. He walked once around the perimeter of the room. He stood at the window. He walked to the fireplace. He walked back to the desk. He stood a while with one hand resting on the leather blotter. Then he reached into his pocket for the small brass key he kept on his own person, and he unlocked the bottom drawer of the desk, the drawer that even Bruno had never opened. Inside there was a small velvet box, faded at the edges. He lifted it out. He set it on the desk. He opened it. A silver chain lay inside on a bed of white silk. From it hung a small pendant, oval, the size of a thumbnail, engraved on its face with 2 initials interwoven. He had commissioned it 3 years ago from a jeweler on Mott Street. He had meant to give it to Olivia on the anniversary of the night they had first met. She had left him 1 week before that anniversary. He had never delivered the chain. He had never opened this drawer since. He looked at the pendant for a very long time. He did not touch it. He did not pick it up. He simply looked. Outside the study door, Bruno stood in the corridor with his hands folded in front of him. He had been standing there for nearly an hour. He did not knock. He knew better than to knock. The telephone on the desk rang. The sound cut through the room like a small blade. Alessandro picked it up. Enrico's voice came through, low and careful. "The results are ready. Do you want me to bring them, or do you want to come down?" Alessandro set the receiver down. He closed the velvet box. He did not lock the drawer. He walked out of the study, past Bruno without a word, and down the wide staircase. The small laboratory occupied a room off the basement corridor, 3 doors down from where Sophia had been questioned. It had once been a wine-tasting room. Enrico had converted it years ago into a modest workspace with a centrifuge, 2 sequencers, and a locked refrigerator. Only 3 people in the world knew what he did in it. Alessandro was one of them. Enrico was standing beside the small work table when Alessandro came in. He held out a single sheet of white paper. Alessandro took it. He did not read the numbers along the top. He did not look at the columns of alleles. He did not look at the header or the reference codes or the dates. His eyes went directly to the last line of the page, printed in a plain sans serif font that carried no drama and no mercy. Probability of paternity, 99.999%. He read it once. He did not read it again. He did not say anything for approximately 10 seconds. Enrico had been counting inside his head without meaning to, the way old physicians count without meaning to, and he stopped counting at 10. He set his pen down on the work table. He picked up his black case. He walked out of the small laboratory without being dismissed, and closed the door softly behind him. Alessandro stood alone in the room for another moment. Then he walked out into the corridor. He did not walk far. He got as far as the base of the stone staircase that led back up to the main floor of the house, and there something inside him refused to go further. He sat down. He sat on the third step from the bottom, and the man who ruled a family of 200 soldiers, who could summon a car from any corner of the city with a single call, who could raise or ruin a life with a nod at a dinner table, sat on a basement staircase in a dark suit with a stain of red wine on the sleeve, holding a single sheet of paper in one hand, and rested his elbows on his knees. He thought of 3 years of silence, 3 years of not knowing where she had gone, 3 years of assuming the worst. He thought of the last night he had seen Olivia, the way she had touched his face at the door of his apartment and said nothing, and how he had assumed, for a long time afterward, that the touch had meant goodbye to him. He understood now that it had meant goodbye to a child she was carrying and had already decided to raise alone. He thought of every bitter thing he had said to himself about her over 3 years, every accusation, every private curse muttered into a glass of whiskey, every hour he had spent building a version of her in his head that was cruel and shallow and false, because a cruel and shallow woman was easier to survive than a woman who had loved him enough to disappear. He thought of Emma, the child in the worn dress, the child who had crossed a marble floor with both small hands under a wine tray, the child he had ordered locked behind a heavy oak door 2 hours ago. There are moments in a man's life when he realizes that the person he once loved never betrayed him, but only protected him through her absence. Such a moment does not arrive as anger. It does not arrive as relief. It arrives as a grief that has been waiting 3 years for permission to be felt, and it is one of the heaviest things a grown man can carry alone on a stone step in a basement. Alessandro sat with that weight for some time. He did not weep. His face did not change. Only his hand, holding the paper, closed slowly until the sheet crumpled softly against his palm. Then he stood. He walked up the staircase. At the top, Bruno was waiting where Bruno always waited. Alessandro did not look at him directly. His voice, when it came, was low, but it was not the same voice that had ordered Sophia locked away. Bring the child and her mother to the sitting room, now. Bruno had served him for 15 years. He heard the difference in one word. He did not ask what had changed. He turned, and he went. They were brought up the back stairs and into the small sitting room on the second floor, the one with the pale blue walls and the low couch and the window that looked out onto the garden. Bruno left them at the door. He did not follow them in. There were no cuffs. There were no men standing at attention along the walls. There was only Alessandro, waiting. Sophia stepped into the room first and Emma came in behind her, one hand still holding a fold of her mother's skirt. Sophia stopped when she saw that no one else was present. She did not know what that meant. She did not know whether it was better or worse than the basement. Alessandro did not stand to greet them. He did not offer an explanation for the hours they had just spent behind a locked door. He did not apologize. He did what he had never done for anyone in that house before. He lowered himself onto one knee in front of the low couch so that his eyes came level with Emma's. Emma stepped behind her mother's leg. Only her small face and the tips of her fingers remained visible. Alessandro did not reach for her. He kept his hands loose on his own knees. He kept his voice low. Emma, he said, do you remember what happened before the party tonight? Emma shook her head. Then she nodded. Then she shook her head again. Sophia bent down and touched the top of her daughter's head very lightly. It is all right, my love, Sophia said. The gentleman is only asking. You are not in trouble. Tell him what you know. Tell him the way you would tell me. Emma looked up at her mother, and then out at Alessandro, and then at the pattern on the carpet. I saw the tall man, she said. Alessandro did not move. Which tall man? He asked, in the same steady voice. The one with the ring. Where did you see him? Emma frowned. She was 3 years old and her sentences came out in the way 3-year-old sentences come out. One small thought at a time. He was in Mama's room. Before the party, I was in the hallway. I was looking for my shoe. He did not see me. What did he do in Mama's room, Emma? Emma reached both her small hands together and mimed a shape between them, the size of a tube of lipstick. He put a little glass thing in Mama's drawer, the one where she keeps her handkerchiefs. He put it under the handkerchiefs. Then he shut the drawer. Then he went out. He did not see me. Sophia had gone very still. Her hand rested on Emma's shoulder and did not shake, but her breathing had stopped for a moment. Alessandro asked one more question. He asked it as gently as he had asked any of the others. "Emma, the ring on his hand. Do you remember what it looked like?" Emma thought hard. She scrunched her face up in the way small children do when they are trying to bring something back. "It was black," she said, "on the top, like a black stone, and it had a corner, a sharp corner, like this." She traced the shape in the air with one small finger. A square face with one edge lifted into a small peak. Alessandro closed his eyes for one full second. He had known that ring for 15 years. He had watched a jeweler in Little Italy set the black onyx into the setting himself. He had paid for it out of his own pocket as a gift for a man on the day that man had been promoted to sit at his right hand. Alessandro opened his eyes. He stood. He rested his hand very briefly on the small crown of Emma's head as he passed her, so lightly that the child barely felt it. Then he walked to the door. Bruno was in the corridor. Alessandro said one word, "Marco." Bruno did not ask what it meant. Bruno did not need to ask. He turned and went. Alessandro walked back into his study and Bruno followed him. 3 more men came up the stairs a few minutes later, summoned by a single sentence Bruno had spoken into his handset in the corridor. Daniel Rossi came in first, tall and thin, his coat still wet at the shoulders from the rain outside. Enzo De Luca came in behind him, broad and quiet, with the calm face of a man who had killed for the family more than once and never spoken of it afterward. Franco Ricci arrived last, the youngest of the 4, no more than 30, sharp-eyed and steady. Alessandro closed the door himself. "What is said in this room," he said, "does not leave this room. Not to your wives, not to your captains, not to anyone in the family above or beside you. If it leaves, I will know, and I will not ask twice." The 4 men said nothing. They had heard him give that instruction before. They had never heard him give it in the voice he was using tonight. He told them what Emma had seen. He did not name the child by relation. He said only that a witness had come forward. He named Marco Bellini as the man in the hallway with the vial. He named Marco as the man whose ring had been described by the witness. Daniel absorbed the name without moving. Enzo's jaw tightened once. Franco looked at Bruno, then at Alessandro, then at the carpet. Bruno did not react at all. He had suspected it for the last hour and had said nothing. "We will not take him tonight in his own home," Alessandro said. "We will bring him here. We will bring him under his own weight. He will come because I ask him to come, and he will come because he believes I am blind." He laid out the plan in a voice that carried no anger and no urgency, and that was more frightening than anger would have been. 2 small teams would be sent to Marco's brownstone within the hour. They would enter after he had left it, and they would search every drawer, every safe, every loose board. They were to take photographs of anything unusual, and send those photographs to Bruno's phone directly. Nothing else. Marco himself would be summoned to the estate. Alessandro would call him personally. The reason would be simple and would carry a weight Marco could not refuse. Alessandro would tell him that Isabella had been poisoned by a hand inside the family, that he did not know whom to trust, and that he needed the one man who had stood beside him for 15 years to sit with him tonight and help him think. Bruno nodded once. Daniel nodded once. Enzo nodded once. Franco was already moving toward the door to arrange the search teams. Alessandro picked up his private line. He dialed the number from memory. Marco answered on the second ring. His voice sounded exactly as it should have sounded. Concerned. Steady. A brother waiting to be asked for something. Alessandro let his own voice do a thing it had not done in 15 years. He let it crack, once, in a place Marco would recognize. "Marco, I need you here tonight. I do not know who to trust right now. I need you here." There was a pause on the other end, only half a breath long. Then Marco said what Marco had to say. "I am on my way. I will be there in 40 minutes. Alessandro set the receiver down. He turned to Bruno. "Move Sophia and Emma to the 3rd floor. The corner suite. 2 men at the door. She is to lock it from the inside as well. Emma is not to be in a room facing the front of the house until this is finished." Bruno went. Downstairs, in the great hall, the last of the candles on the mantel had burned themselves out. The house was very dark and very quiet. At 2 minutes before 11 o'clock, a pair of headlights swept across the wet gravel of the long drive. They crossed the iron gate at the front of the estate and slowed as the gate opened for them from within. Marco's car was arriving. Marco came through the front door alone. He was wearing a dark overcoat, and his hair was damp with the rain that had begun again on the drive up. He did not carry a briefcase. He did not carry a weapon that Alessandro could see. He came the way a brother comes into the house of a brother in trouble, with an open expression and a hand ready to be offered. Alessandro met him in the main sitting room. the large one on the ground floor with the two long sofas and the low table between them. He offered Marco a seat. He offered him a drink. Marco declined the drink and took the seat. "Talk to me," Marco said. "What do we know?" Alessandro talked. He spoke slowly. He described the moment in the Great Hall. He described Enrico's diagnosis. He described the search of the household, though he was careful about what he named and what he did not. He said that a vial had been found. He said that suspicion had first fallen on the housekeeper, but that he was not satisfied. Marco listened with the quality of listening he had always given his brother. His hands were still. His eyes did not leave Alessandro's face. He asked the right questions. He offered the right silences. Alessandro watched Marco's right hand where it rested against the arm of the couch. The ring caught the low lamplight once, a square face of black stone. One raised corner filed to a small peak. Somewhere across the city, in a brownstone on a quiet street off 3rd Avenue, Daniel Rossi lifted a corner of a rug in the master bedroom and found the seam of a small floor safe. Enzo brought a portable drill. It took them 4 minutes. Inside the safe there were 3 sealed envelopes, a stack of bearer notes, and a small object wrapped in a strip of black velvet. Enzo unwrapped it carefully. A glass vial, identical in shape to the one in Alessandro's study. Amber liquid resting inside it. Daniel photographed it in place. He photographed it in his palm. He sent the images to Bruno's phone at 11:22. Bruno's phone buzzed once, softly, against his hip. He was standing at the corner of the room, near the tall window, 3 steps behind Marco. He glanced down. He read what needed to be read. Then he lifted his eyes. His eyes met Alessandro's for less than a second. It was not a long look. It was not an obvious look. To any other man in the room, it would have been nothing at all. But Alessandro knew, in the moment Bruno's eyes lifted, that Marco was watching him back, in the reflection of the tall window across the room. 15 years of standing at the same side of the same table had trained Marco to read Alessandro's face the way Alessandro read his. Neither man had a look the other could not decode. Marco set his hands on his knees. "Alessandro," he said, in a voice that was still perfectly steady. "Forgive me. I need to use the restroom." Alessandro nodded once, without looking at him. Down the hall, 2nd door on the left, Marco stood. He walked out of the sitting room at an ordinary pace. He did not run. He passed the 2nd door on the left without slowing. He continued down the corridor to the small service door at the rear of the house, opened it quietly, and stepped out into the wet garden. He crossed the lawn at a steady jog. He vaulted the low stone wall on the east side of the property, the one that separated the estate from the service road. A dark sedan was idling on the road with its lights off. He got into the passenger side without a word. The car pulled away before the door had fully closed. Bruno was already moving. He had reached the service door within 20 seconds. He was over the wall within 40, but the road beyond was empty by the time he reached it, and the sound of the sedan's tires was already fading into the traffic on the avenue 2 blocks away. Bruno stood in the rain for a long moment. Then he turned and went back inside. The security team sealed the gates. The perimeter was reset. The dogs were called up. Every door in the estate was locked from the inside within 4 minutes. None of it mattered. Marco was already gone. Alessandro sat alone in his study some time after. The vial had been placed in the center of the desk. Beside it stood a framed photograph he had kept on that desk for 10 years. It showed 6 men at a long table, taken at a dinner in a private room on Mulberry Street. Alessandro sat at the head. Marco sat at his right hand. In the photograph, Marco's right hand rested on the tablecloth in the foreground, and on his ring finger, catching the light of the flash, was a square black stone with one raised corner. Alessandro looked at the photograph for a long time. He did not lift it from the desk. He did not break the glass. He simply reached forward with 2 fingers and laid the frame face down on the wood, and left it there. Bruno went up to the 3rd floor himself. He knocked twice on the corner suite before he unlocked the door, and he waited for Sophia to answer from within before he stepped inside. She was sitting on the edge of the bed with Emma curled against her chest. Neither of them was asleep. "Mr. Moretti asks that you come downstairs," Bruno said quietly. "Not to the west wing, to the breakfast room." Sophia did not ask what that meant. She lifted Emma into her arms and followed him. The breakfast room was a small square room off the main kitchen, with a round table under a pendant lamp and a long window that faced the garden. In daylight it caught the morning sun and warmed the wood floor. At this hour it was lit only by the low lamp above the table and by a single sconce beside the sideboard. Someone had set a plate of small sandwiches and a pot of chamomile tea on the table. The chairs were pulled out. Alessandro was already there. He was standing at the window with his back to the room. but he turned when Sophia came in. He did not sit. He waited until Sophia had lowered Emma onto the chair beside her and settled the child against her shoulder. Then he spoke. "Someone placed the vial in your room," he said. "Someone in this house arranged for you to be blamed for what happened tonight. You did not poison Isabella. You were not responsible for any part of what she suffered. You are not under arrest. You are not to be treated as anything other than a guest of this house." Sophia did not ask him how he knew. She did not ask him what had happened between the moment she was locked in the West Wing and the moment she was brought downstairs. She looked at him for a breath. She lowered her head. Once. She wrapped both arms around Emma and held the child against her chest. Alessandro waited until she had lifted her head again. "I need you to remain in the estate," he said. "Not as a prisoner. As a person under my protection. The one who arranged this has left the house but has not left the city. He may know that you are the reason he was found out. He may act again. Until this is resolved, you and the child will stay here. Rooms will be prepared. A doctor will look at Emma in the morning. She has had a hard night." "I understand," Sophia said. That was all she said. Alessandro pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. He did not touch the tea. Emma, in her mother's arms, had already begun to slide toward sleep. Her small hand rested loosely against her mother's collarbone. Her eyelids drooped, opened, drooped again. Within a few minutes her breathing had slowed and her cheek had settled against Sophia's shoulder, and she was gone. Sophia lowered her voice. "She loved you," Sophia said. "You should know that. She loved you the whole time she was carrying her. She did not stop. She used to talk to the baby about you at night when she thought I could not hear. She would say your name and then she would say, 'Your father is a good man, and one day, if the world is kind, you will get to meet him.' She wrote a letter. Before the delivery, she sealed it and made me swear I would give it to Emma on her 18th birthday. It is in a safety deposit box in a bank in Newark. I have never opened it." Alessandro did not answer. His hands rested on the table between them, and he looked at them for a while as though he were not quite sure they were his. "She did not want you to know because she believed knowing would put both of you in danger," Sophia said. "She was not always right. But she was never trying to hurt you. She was never trying to hurt anyone." "I know," Alessandro said. The two words were very quiet. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. He took out the small velvet box that had been in the locked drawer of his desk for 3 years. He set it on the table between them and pushed it forward with 2 fingers. "When Emma is old enough," he said, "give this to her. Tell her it was meant for her mother." The sky over the estate was still gray when Bruno came into the study. He did not knock. He came in with a folder in his hand and closed the door behind him. "He has 30 men so far," Bruno said. "Give or take 2. Maybe more by afternoon. He has called in every soldier who owed him a favor personally, not the family. Some of them we know, a few of them we do not. He has not surfaced anywhere we have eyes. He is not at his brownstone, not at the club on Mott, not at any of his usual apartments. He has gone somewhere prepared." Alessandro was standing at the window. He had not slept. He was still in the same shirt he had worn the night before, though he had at last removed the jacket with the wine stain on the sleeve. "How long?" he said. "Hours, maybe. Not more than a day. He knows we know. He will move before we move first." Alessandro turned. "Seal the estate. Not the way we sealed it last night. Better. I want 2 more men on the roof. I want the drainage grates checked. I want the wine cellar door reinforced from the inside. I want the north perimeter walked every 15 minutes, not 30. 15. I want every man armed and I want every man briefed before 9 o'clock. Bruno was already writing. "Emma and Sophia," Alessandro said. "Down to the wine cellar. Now, make it comfortable. Blankets, a light, something for the child to drink. 2 men outside the cellar door. Nobody else knows they are down there. Nobody. Yes, Isabella. Still unconscious," Bruno said. "But past the worst. Enrico called an hour ago. He says her body has done more of the work than he expected. She will wake, most likely within the next day. Her kidneys are holding." Alessandro nodded once. He walked to the desk and picked up the internal line. "Send 4 of ours to the clinic. Not 2. 4. Rotating shifts. Nobody goes into that room except Enrico and the 2 nurses he has named. Nobody. Not a delivery man. Not a florist. Not a priest. Not another patient. Not the cleaning staff. I do not care who they are. I do not care what they are carrying. I do not care what badge they show. Nobody." He put the phone down. Bruno had gone. Alessandro heard him down the corridor already, giving orders in the low voice that meant everyone would move without asking questions. Sophia was brought down to the wine cellar within the half hour. Emma had woken in the dark and was frightened by the change in rooms and by the low stone ceiling. Sophia knelt on the folded blanket someone had spread on the floor and pulled the child into her lap. "This is a very old room," Sophia said quietly. "It has been here longer than either of us has been alive. Do you know what people used to do in rooms like this?" Emma shook her head against her mother's collarbone. "They kept the things they loved best," Sophia said. "In case a storm came, in case there was thunder, they put them here because the walls are thick, and the storm cannot get in." "Are we the things somebody loves?" Emma asked, in the very small voice she used only when she was afraid. Sophia held her tighter. "We are, my love," she said. "We are." Upstairs, in the study, Alessandro opened the second drawer of his desk. Beneath a folded silk cloth lay the old Beretta pistol he had carried since he was 23 years old. The bluing had worn thin along the slide. He checked the magazine. He checked the chamber. He seated a fresh round and slid the pistol into the holster under his jacket. Bruno came back into the room with the phone still against his ear. He listened. He did not speak. His shoulders drew back a quarter of an inch, and Alessandro read the change before Bruno lowered the phone. Bruno said only 2 words. "They're coming." The first sound was the gate. A dark line of 6 vehicles broke through the south iron gate of the estate at full speed. The lead sedan hit the wrought iron above the lock, and the gate tore free of its hinges with a shriek of metal and a low crack of stone as the anchor blocks split. The vehicles did not slow. They spread out across the long drive as they came. 3 angling toward the front of the house, 2 peeling east across the lawn, 1 holding back near the tree line as a rear guard. Bruno's voice cut across the front hall. "Positions. Now." The men had been waiting. They did not need to be told twice. 2 ran for the tall front windows on either side of the main door. 2 took the landing above the door. 2 more moved to the flanking corridors on the ground floor to cover the side entrances. Franco Ricci went to the east window with his rifle already at his shoulder. Enzo De Luca went to the east service door. Daniel Rossi took the west corridor with 2 men behind him. The first burst of gunfire came from the lawn before the front vehicles had fully stopped. It struck the tall windows on the ground floor and turned the leaded glass into a shower of jagged pieces that fell across the marble in a long sweep. The chandelier over the entry hall shook once, and then a second burst clipped its central chain. It came down in a slow, terrible arc and struck the floor of the great hall with a sound that shook the framed portraits on the walls 2 rooms away. Alessandro walked down the main staircase. He did not crouch. He did not slow. He did not use the banister for cover. He wore no jacket. The Beretta was in his right hand at his side. He stopped 4 steps from the bottom, on the landing where a man could see the front door and be seen by anyone coming through it, and he waited. He knew Marco. Marco would not send other men to do this last part. Marco would come in through the front door because Marco needed the house to see him do it. Marco had spent 15 years standing behind Alessandro. Tonight, he needed the house to watch him walk in front. Far below the ground floor, in the wine cellar under the east wing, Sophia sat with her back pressed against the stone wall. Emma was in her lap, tucked against her chest. The sound of gunfire above them came through the ceiling like the pounding of a heavy hand on a table. Emma did not cry. She did not close her eyes. She kept her small face turned toward the low stone ceiling, and she listened, as if the sound were something she was trying to memorize so she could make sense of it later. Sophia held her tighter and pressed her lips against the crown of the child's head, and did not tell her anything, because there was nothing to tell. Above, Franco took a round in his left shoulder as he was moving between the east window and the second one down the hall. He did not go down. He fell back against the wall, braced the stock of his rifle under his good arm, and kept firing. Blood ran the length of his shirt sleeve and pooled at his cuff and dripped onto the polished wood floor in slow, steady drops that no one noticed. Enzo drove 3 men back at the east service door with a single, well-placed volley, and then held that door alone for the next 4 minutes. Daniel and his 2 men caught a second wave crossing the west lawn and folded them back into the tree line. The house held. It held because the men in it had known how to hold a house for 15 years, and because they had been briefed before 9 o'clock this morning by a boss whose voice they had never disobeyed. The smell of gunpowder settled in the front hall like a low fog. Broken glass lay in a wide arc across the marble. A dark line of blood ran from the doorway of the east corridor where one of Marco's men had fallen, crossing the threshold. Footsteps pounded on the wood floors of the upper landing as Bruno's men moved from window to window. The front door had not yet been breached. Then it opened. Marco pushed it open with his left hand. He did not kick it. He did not throw his shoulder against it. He turned the handle and walked in, the way a man walks into a house he has entered 1,000 times before. His right hand held a pistol at his side, not raised, not lowered, held. He stopped just inside the doorway. He looked across the great hall through the drifting smoke and the wreckage of the chandelier, and he saw Alessandro standing on the 4th step of the staircase. Alessandro looked back at him. Both men were armed. Both men had their weapons at their sides. Neither of them lifted his hand. The smoke moved slowly between them. Neither man fired. Marco spoke first. His voice did not rise. There was no accusation in it, no bitterness that showed itself on the surface. There was only a tiredness so deep it seemed to have settled into the bones of the words themselves. "Do you remember the night we ran out of the old block in Brooklyn, Alessandro? You had blood on your face and I had blood on my hands. Your father was already dead. My father did not come home that night either. We were 14. We slept under the pier by the river because there was nowhere else to go, and because nobody thought to look for 2 boys under a pier in the rain." Alessandro did not answer. He had not moved from the 4th step of the staircase. "You slept first," Marco said. "I sat awake because one of us had to. You told me in the morning that we were brothers now, not by blood, better than blood. You said the word twice, so I would remember it. I did remember it. I have remembered it every day for 15 years. He took 1 step forward into the great hall. His pistol was still at his side. Every plan we built after that, I built. Every deal on the docks. Every conversation with the Russians in '96. Every night I sat in a car 3 blocks from a meeting waiting to hear whether you would walk out alive. I stood behind you when Salvatore came at us in '99. I took a bullet in the leg for you in 2001. I am the one who negotiated the truce with the Colangelos when you were too angry to sit at the same table with them. I am the one who found the accountant who saved the family $5 million in the Miami audit. I am the one who cleaned up the mess with the girl in Atlantic City, and I am the one who buried the driver who saw too much in the summer of 2008. His voice did not rise as he listed them. He was not asking to be praised for any of it. He was only laying the record on the marble floor between them, one item at a time. "Everything I did," Marco said, "was written under your name. Every time. I did not ask you to change that. I understood what the family needed. I understood that the name at the top mattered more than the hands underneath. I told myself the difference did not matter because we were brothers." He looked around the great hall as though he were seeing the house for the first time. "Then you announced your engagement to Isabella. On the terrace last spring. You raised your glass. You said, 'My future is at this table.' You did not look at me when you said it. You looked at her. And I understood, standing 3 steps behind you, that I was not part of the future you were describing. I never had been. I had been shadow the entire time. That was the night I understood. I would never be brother, only shadow." Alessandro said nothing. He did not interrupt. He did not lift the beretta. He listened. "I put the poison in a glass," Marco said. "It was meant for you. I watched you walk toward the window with an old man from Naples, and I watched Isabella pick up the wrong glass, and I did not stop her. I could have. There was a second. I did not use it." He did not say whether he was sorry. Alessandro asked him a single question. His voice was quiet in the way a river is quiet when it is very deep. "Was it worth 15 years, Marco?" Marco did not answer at once. He looked at the fallen chandelier. He looked at the dark line of blood along the east corridor. He looked at the small crescent of dried wine on the marble that no one had yet cleaned. "I don't know anymore," he said. Then he raised the pistol. 2 shots split the air of the great hall almost as one. The sound came so close together that afterward none of the men in the house could say with certainty which had come first. It was as if the 2 men had drawn from the same breath. Marco went down. He did not fall backward. He folded forward at the knees and then sideways, one shoulder striking the marble first, and the pistol slid from his hand and skated an arm's length across the polished stone before it came to rest against the base of a broken chair. Alessandro was not touched. Marco's round had passed close enough to Alessandro's left ear that he felt the disturbance in the air, but it had not struck him. It had struck the wood of the banister behind him, splintering the carved wood inward. Whether the aim had been off by an accident of nerves, or by a decision Marco had made in the last quarter of a second, no one in that hall would ever know. Marco had been the finest shot in the family for 15 years. He had never missed a man at that distance before. Alessandro walked down the last 4 steps of the staircase. He did not lower the beretta at once. He crossed the great hall through the drifting smoke, past the fallen chandelier, past the broken glass, and he stopped at the place where Marco lay. He knelt. He set the pistol on the marble beside him. He put one hand under Marco's head, gently, the way a man lifts something breakable. Marco was still breathing, barely. His eyes were open, and they found Alessandro's face and held onto it. His hand rose and closed on the front of Alessandro's shirt. It was not a strong grip. It was the last strength he had. He pulled Alessandro down a small distance, enough that his own voice would reach. He did not apologize. He did not ask for forgiveness. He said only one thing: "You should have made me equal." His hand loosened. His eyes did not close. His chest rose once more, a shallow lift, and then it did not rise again. Alessandro stayed on one knee beside him for a long time. His hand was still under Marco's head. He lowered it, slowly, to the marble. The great hall went quiet by degrees. The last of Marco's men had thrown down their weapons the moment they saw him fall. The sound of gunfire had stopped. What remained was the low, ragged breathing of the wounded, and the soft ticking of the fires in the sconces along the walls where a stray round had ignited the oil. Bruno crossed the hall on foot, his rifle now lowered against his hip, and stopped at Alessandro's shoulder. 7 of Marco's men dead, he said quietly. The rest have surrendered. We have them face down along the east lawn. On our side, Franco and Enzo are hit, Franco in the shoulder, Enzo in the thigh. Both will live. Nobody of ours is dead. Alessandro did not answer. He looked at Marco's face for another moment. Then he stood. The front of his shirt was dark where Marco's hand had gripped it. The blood had soaked through the white cotton in the shape of 5 fingers. He did not go to change. He did not look down at himself. He turned toward the front doors, which still stood half open with the rain coming in against the marble. Bruno's phone buzzed against his chest. He answered it in one motion, still walking. He listened for perhaps 4 seconds. He did not speak. When he lowered the phone from his ear, his face had gone the color of wet paper. "The hospital," he said. Alessandro did not ask for detail. He was already moving. He did not stop for his jacket. He did not stop for a fresh weapon. He crossed the wet gravel of the front court and pulled open the passenger door of the first sedan in the row. The headlights came on in the smoke-filled courtyard. 2 more cars started up behind him. Bruno was already climbing into the second. They pulled through the shattered gate into the rain. The corridor on the 6th floor of the private clinic was quiet at that hour. The overhead lights had been dimmed to their night setting. A cleaning cart moved slowly along the polished tile toward the double doors of the private wing, pushed by a man in a gray coverall with a hospital identification badge clipped to his breast pocket. The badge was real. The face on it was not his. At the door of the private wing, one of Alessandro's men sat on a low stool with his back to the wall. He looked up when the cart approached. He did not recognize the face, but the badge was correct and the cart was correct and the hour was correct for the shift he had been told to expect. He never had the chance to stand. The man in the coverall stepped in close and looped a length of piano wire around his throat with the ease of a man who had done it before. The sound it made was very small. A short intake of breath. A softer sound as the guard's head came forward against the wire. Then nothing. The man in the coverall lowered him back against the wall so it looked, from a distance, as though the guard had merely leaned to rest. He took the guard's radio and clipped it to his own belt. He pushed the cart through the double doors. Isabella's room was the third on the left. A single small lamp burned on the wall above her bed. The dialysis machine had been rolled away hours before. She lay under a white sheet with her hair spread against the pillow. She was still asleep. Enrico had said she would sleep another hour at least. She was not alone. In the chair beside the bed, Sophia sat with her hands folded in her lap. Alessandro had asked her to come, quietly, before he had left the estate for the confrontation with Marco. He had asked her to sit with Isabella through the worst of the night. He had said that if anything went wrong at the house, he wanted someone in the room who knew how to be quiet and knew how to hold a woman's hand. Sophia had come. She had been sitting there for nearly 2 hours. The door opened. The man in the coverall stepped inside. He did not look at Sophia. His eyes went straight to the bed. He lifted a pistol from the pocket of his coverall. The barrel was long. It was long because it carried a suppressor. He raised it toward Isabella's sleeping face. Sophia did not think. There was no thought in what she did. She rose from the chair in a single motion and put her body between the barrel of the pistol and the woman on the bed. The pistol coughed. The sound was small and dry. Sophia went down. She fell across the corner of the bed and slid to the floor between the bed and the chair. Her hand caught the edge of the sheet as she fell and pulled it partway with her. The door burst open a second later. 2 of Alessandro's men, who had reached the 6th floor no more than 4 minutes before their boss, cleared the doorway in one motion. They did not shout. They did not warn. 3 shots came from the near one's pistol in the space of a single breath. The man in the coverall was thrown back against the cleaning cart. He struck it and slid down along the plastic side and did not move again. The suppressed pistol clattered onto the tile beside him. Isabella's eyes opened. She had been pulled from sleep by the small, dry cough of the first shot and by the harder crack of the 3 that followed. She lifted her head from the pillow, slowly, her body still weak from the poison and the long hours of the machine. Her eyes found Sophia on the floor beside the bed. The sheet had come partway down with her. There was blood on the sheet. There was blood spreading in a wide, dark shape across the front of Sophia's blouse. Isabella tried to sit up. She could not. She reached toward Sophia with a hand that trembled and could not close. The door opened again. Alessandro came in without his jacket. His shirt was still dark with Marco's blood at the front. Bruno was 1 step behind him. 2 more of their men filled the doorway. Alessandro stopped. He looked at Sophia on the floor. He looked at the widening dark shape on her blouse. He did not see the small assassin, already dead against the cart. He did not see Isabella, propped weakly on her elbow. He did not see the 2 nurses who were already running down the corridor toward the sound. He saw only a woman on a hospital floor and, in the same moment, a 3-year-old girl he had shut in a wine cellar 2 miles across the city. Emma was safe in that cellar. Emma was warm on a folded blanket. Emma was breathing evenly under the stone ceiling. Alessandro knew all of that. He did not feel any of it. What he felt, in that single instant, was that a child was about to lose her mother a second time, and that there was nothing in the world he had built, nothing in the name or the power or the 15 years, that would be worth anything at all if he did not stop it now. They lifted her onto a gurney within a minute. Enrico himself came running down the corridor in his shirt sleeves, 1 hand already pulling on a glove. He crouched beside the gurney as it moved. His other hand pressed hard against the wound at Sophia's shoulder. He did not slow the gurney to speak. He spoke to the surgical team as they ran. Entry wound at the left shoulder, above the clavicle. Exit wound behind. She is bleeding heavily. The round has passed close to the subclavian. I want 2 units of O negative in the operating room before we open her. Move. The gurney disappeared through the double doors of the surgical wing. The doors swung shut. Alessandro stood in the corridor without moving. The blood on the front of his shirt was no longer only Marco's. Some of it now belonged to Sophia, from when he had knelt beside her on the tile of Isabella's room and pressed his own hand against her shoulder before Enrico had arrived. 2 nurses helped Isabella back into her bed at the far end of the corridor. She was still very weak. She had asked, twice, what had happened. She had been told, gently, that the woman who had shielded her was in surgery, and that surgery was going well so far. She had closed her eyes then, and the nurses had lowered her onto the pillow and drawn the sheet up over her. Bruno left the clinic within the hour. He drove himself back to the estate, and he brought Emma from the wine cellar himself. He did not tell her where he was taking her. He told her only that her mother was waiting for her. He carried her in his arms across the hospital parking lot because she would not walk. Her arms were around his neck. She was still holding the corner of the blanket she had been given down in the cellar. Alessandro was still in the corridor when Bruno came through the double doors. Emma saw him. She saw the front of his shirt. The words she had been forming somewhere at the back of her small throat did not come. Her mouth stayed open. She looked at the blood, and she looked up at his face, and she said nothing at all. Alessandro lowered himself onto 1 knee in front of her. It was the second time in the story of these 2 days that he had lowered himself to Emma's height. The first time had been in the sitting room on the 2nd floor of the estate, when he had asked her about the tall man with the ring. That first time, he had asked her a question. This time, he did something he had not done to any person, of any age, in the last 20 years of his life. He apologized. "Emma," he said, "I am sorry. I am sorry that I put you in that room last night. I am sorry that I put your mother in that room. I did not know. If I had known, I would not have done it. I am sorry that your mother is in a room now that I cannot follow her into. I am sorry that I did not protect her better. I am sorry that I did not know you existed until yesterday." His voice did not shake as he said it. He said it in the same low, steady voice he used to give orders. He said it the way a man says the only true thing he has said all day. Emma did not understand all of the words. She was 3 years old. She understood the front of his shirt, and she understood the name of the person who was not standing in the corridor with them. She stepped forward, and she put her small arms around Alessandro's neck. Alessandro closed his eyes. He rested his cheek against the top of her head, so lightly that if the child had turned suddenly, she would not have felt it. There are moments when a grown man understands, all at once, that he has spent his life defending the wrong things. Power, the name, the empire he inherited and built and refused to let go of. He looks down at what he has actually been protecting, and he sees that it was never any of that. It was, only ever, 2 people he did not know how to look at directly, the daughter he did not know he had, and the woman who had raised that daughter for 3 years without ever asking to be thanked. When a man arrives at that understanding, on a hospital floor with the blood of 2 people on his shirt, he does not become a new man. He becomes, for the first time, the man he was always meant to be. Alessandro stayed on his knee with Emma's arms around his neck for a long time. They sat on a bench in the corridor after that, the 2 of them together. Emma fell asleep against his side. Bruno stood at the far end of the corridor with his hands clasped in front of him, and he did not sit down for 4 hours. At the end of the 4th hour, the double doors of the surgical wing opened, and Enrico came out. His mask was pulled down beneath his chin. His gloves were off. There was a line of dried sweat along the side of his temple. He stopped in front of Alessandro. He did not sit down. "She's stable," he said. "She'll live." Alessandro did not answer. He did not thank Enrico. He did not turn his head. He did not lift Emma from where she lay against his side. He only lowered his head, slowly, until his forehead rested against the top of his daughter's small hand. Months later, the estate was quiet in a different way than it had once been quiet. The chandelier in the great hall had been replaced. The tall windows had been reglazed with new leaded glass, cut and set by the same craftsman who had done the originals many years before. The marble where the wine had spilled and the blood had dried had been polished so completely that no one who visited the house would have known anything had happened there at all. Only Alessandro still slowed for a fraction of a step whenever he crossed that particular part of the floor. Isabella had recovered fully. She walked in the garden every morning now, sometimes alone, sometimes with Sophia beside her. Her color had come back. Her laugh, when it returned for the first time one afternoon over a small dinner, had made 3 people at the table put down their forks and simply listen. Sophia had recovered from the surgery. Her left arm was a little weaker than her right now. She could not lift a full tray of glasses with that hand the way she used to. She had been told, gently, that she was no longer employed as a housekeeper, and that her home was now the small suite on the 3rd floor of the estate, the one with the window that looked out onto the eastern garden. Emma had a room of her own beside her mother's. It was painted pale yellow. There were books on the shelves and a small wooden horse on the dresser and a nightlight shaped like a moon. Alessandro called the family together in the long room on the ground floor. 24 men came, the heads of every branch of the organization. They stood in a wide half-circle. They did not know why they had been summoned. Alessandro walked in with Emma's hand in his. Sophia walked behind them with her hand on Emma's shoulder. Isabella walked at Alessandro's side. He said only 5 words. He did not raise his voice. "This is my daughter, Emma." No one in that room asked a single question. There was no question that needed to be asked. The men bowed their heads, one by one, in the old way. It was done. Later, in the small sitting room upstairs, Alessandro took the velvet box from his pocket. He had not given it back to Sophia to hold for Emma's 18th birthday after all. He knelt in front of his daughter and opened the box himself. The silver chain lay inside. He lifted it out. He lowered it over Emma's head. The pendant hung down to the middle of her small stomach. It was much too long for her. She looked down at it and touched it once with the tip of a finger. She did not take it off. The wedding took place in the garden behind the estate in the last soft hours of an autumn afternoon. There were white flowers along the aisle. The tables were set under the old trees. The light coming through the leaves was the color of warm honey. Isabella wore a simple dress. Alessandro wore a dark suit. Sophia stood in the closest row of guests, her arm holding a small bouquet, her face steady and calm. Emma walked in front. She carried the 2 rings on a small silk cushion, holding it with both her small hands the way she had once held a silver tray. She wore the same worn dress she had worn on the night of the engagement. Only now, it had been washed and mended by a seamstress, who had let out the hem and repaired the frayed cuff with such care that the dress looked new to anyone who had not seen it before. The silver pendant hung against the front of the dress and caught the sunlight as she walked. Isabella bent down at the end of the aisle before she stepped up onto the small platform. She kissed the top of Emma's head. Then she straightened, took Alessandro's hand, and turned to face the man who would marry them. "Dear friends, thank you for staying with this story until the very end. Every story like this one carries a small lesson, and this one carries a simple one worth remembering. The people we look past because their clothes are worn, or their voices are small, or their place at our table seems less important, are very often the people carrying the truth we most need to hear. A child in a mended dress can change a house. A quiet woman who asks for nothing can save a life, and a man who has spent all his years protecting power can be softened, in a single night, by a pair of small arms around his neck. Now we would love to hear from you. How did this story make you feel as you listened? Did any part of it remind you of someone in your own life, a person you almost overlooked, or a kindness you almost missed? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your words help us understand what stories move you most, and we read every one of them from the bottom of our hearts. If this story touched you, please take a moment to hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this video with someone who needs to hear a story like this today. Your support allows us to bring you a new emotional story every single day. We wish every one of you watching good health, a peaceful heart, and a life filled with quiet joy in the days ahead. Thank you for being here with us. Goodbye for now, and we will see you again in the next video.